What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review of Call of Cthulhu after 100%. That said, this is going to be a pretty short review, as this is a pretty short game, which means I am foregoing my usual format and just kind of talking about the game in this one, albeit with a little bit of structure. Furthermore, if you are new to my channel, I review games after 100% to set me apart from other reviewers, as well as give me some credibility on that front. My Steam page is public and linked in the description below. Feel free to check it out. 100% does mean more than just the achievements. However, the achievements are obviously included. But these reviews cover a wide variety of things, and if you'd like to know exactly what, and you go to my channel page, the first video you're going to see if you're not subscribed is a video explaining it. But with no further ado, let's jump right into this review. Call of Cthulhu is sort of a role-playing survival horror game almost, but in my opinion, it's more of a narrative experience than anything else. But the game was developed by Cyanide and published by Focus Home Interactive, and as you might imagine from the title, is of course inspired by the short story, The Call of Cthulhu. There are, however, in my opinion, references to a great many of H.P. Lovecraft's works, so if you're a big fan of the Cthulhu mythos, you'll likely spot references to many of those titles. The beginning of the game gives me personally a very big Shadows over Innsmouth vibe. But the game sees you in 1924 Boston taking on the role of Edward Pierce. Pierce is a private investigator as well as a war veteran who is suffering from increasingly bizarre nightmares. As you might imagine, this has led him to use sleeping pills and alcohol in excess, and the start of the game conveys all of that, as well as setting us on the path of the Sarah Hawkins investigation. Sarah Hawkins' father comes to your PI office, explains that there is a great deal of mystery surrounding the death of his daughter, Sarah Hawkins, and her family in a fire on the island of Darkwater just off the coast. Now, before you actually leave, you're going to get a chance to set up your skills. I'll have a few more things to say about these later on, but at the beginning of the game, you can basically allocate some skill points into various skills, which will help you in various ways throughout the game. Strength is, of course, going to help you move things or overtake people. Investigation will help you do things like pick locks or learn information. Spot hidden, of course, lets you find hidden objects. The two notable exceptions are occultism and medicine. These two cannot be increased by character points. They are increased as you find items throughout the game. And as you move through the game, you will be given more character points to then allocate to these particular skills. And then from there, you head off to the island of Darkwater, where the game begins in full force. Now, let's talk a little bit about the story, but try not to spoil any of it, as this is, of course, a fairly narratively driven game, which makes the story very important. But I will say, the game starts off very strong. The first few chapters, if you will, see you investigating things and putting your skills to good use, as you find various solutions to a problem, which then advances the narrative. However, around chapter 4 or 5, this unfortunately starts to fall apart a little bit, and your skills become more and more meaningless, because most of the checks will start becoming medicine and occultism, which you can't even spend character points to increase anyway. And later in the game, the checks for your skills become very, very few. Spot hidden is probably the one that stays the most useful throughout the game, with all of the other checks becoming very few and far between. So what starts off as this sort of narrative puzzle solver in some ways kind of just turns into you being told a story as you play through it, which is okay. It's just that it's a tone shift from the beginning of the game that is a little strange, frankly. Now, luckily, I think the story itself is strong and interesting, which kind of helps make up for that fact. Now, when it comes to the endings, there are multiple endings. However, the main bulk of the game remains largely the same no matter how you play it. You will, however, as you play, make decisions like whether or not to drink alcohol, whether to kill or spare certain people, or accept or not accept help throughout the game. And those decisions can contribute to the endings that are available to you from a total of 4. Now, you'll likely need 2 playthroughs to see all of the endings, but you can get up to 3 of those endings in a single run. That said, if you're familiar with the Cthulhu mythos at all, if you're hoping for a positive ending, you might want to hedge your expectations a little bit. Now, what this game does better than anything is honestly the atmosphere. When you arrive on Darkwater, there's all this local culture and lore you can take in. It was this booming whaling town that has seen better days. People talk about this miraculous catch, which was this amazing whale that fed the whole town. But since then, it has kind of devolved into a struggling town with a big problem with gangs, or at least one specific gang. And overall, the vibe is just incredibly creepy and very much so what you'd expect from a game set in the Cthulhu mythos. So that part they absolutely nailed. But again, talking earlier about where the choices kind of fall apart with the RPG mechanics, what you're left with is basically a game that is like playing through a book. And I enjoy games like that. I've actually played many a game exactly like that. The problem is they present you with these RPG elements that are supposed to be there, and you make choices at the beginning that then ultimately don't matter at all. In fact, none of the endings have almost anything to do with your skills, practically, as I had just explained. While the story is very solid, I enjoyed the story a great deal. I liked all the endings. I liked all the choices even that you could make throughout the game. But that said, a decent portion of this game is trying to be this sort of RPG investigative thing that it just fails to deliver on, which is probably the most glaring issue that it has. Now, another issue is that while there is combat, there's precious little of it, and engaging directly with enemies is basically never the goal, which makes the little bit of combat that is present feel just really clunky and strange, which is fine because you're, for the most part, supposed to be avoiding the enemies. It's rare that you actually want to engage with any enemy at all, because typically speaking, that's an instant death for you, which means you're relying on stealth quite a bit, but the stealth itself really isn't that great either, and seems very clunky. So ultimately, the game is trying to tell you a story with these just weird attempts at RPG elements that don't really seem to pan out. But the atmosphere and the story itself, again, are very good. I think those are what make this particular game worth playing. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and wrap this up here. The game itself is full price, typically speaking $20. However, it is a bit older. It was released in 2018, so you can actually find it on sale pretty regularly. But even at full price, I think it's a pretty fun story. It's going to run you probably somewhere between 8 to 10 hours for one playthrough. And overall, it's not bad at all. Again, the story's solid, but the actual gameplay mechanics tend to be a bit wanting. So if the Cthulhu mythos or the story itself sound interesting to you, then I think it's definitely worth buying. But if the gameplay of it is more important to you, then definitely not. There you go, guys. My fairly quick review of the Call of Cthulhu. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.